Hi guys. This is another episode of the Wake Me Up podcast, and this time out, I have my really good friend and my batchmate from school. His name is Raj Vardhan, and he recently, I think a year back, he graduated from Delhi University in the economic honors. So, first of all, Raj, how are you?
I'm good, good. Just you know, sustaining through difficult times, but yeah, otherwise all good.
The
Uh,
usuals. Yeah.
the usual, yeah.
Yeah. So the topic that we're going to talk about today is the new IT rules 2021. It's
hmm
a huge name for it. The IT rules guidelines for intermediaries and digital media ethics code
hmm
2021.
Yeah.
So off the top, Raj, when you hear this, and with all the media speculations on Twitter, on WhatsApp, and obviously
Yeah.
like on Instagram, you hear a lot. You hear
Yeah.
both sides of the stories, but mainly you hear one perspective more than the other,
Absolutely.
right? So just off the top, what's your view on it?
Hmm. So, from my understanding, I've looked at it from the purely technical view first, which is that getting down to what the government expects these social media companies to do, and on the expectations the government has of them on how they should comply to quote unquote guidelines. uh, I think that the whole my personal view states that I think the whole appointment of a grievance officer
Mhm.
for addressing issues that
Yeah,
might arise, intuitively it makes sense to me.
right.
I feel like lately in the past few years, the discourse on social media has become a bit more like vicious. And you want to debate issues, be be my guest, please do that. But there is a lot of like various forms of cyberbullying that it can take,
Mhm.
and there are just different types of uh, different types of issues that can arise with unregulation of this entire discourse online.
Right.
You can defame people, you can
Mhm.
send them threats, you can, again, bully people for their opinions. And that's just like scratching the surface when it comes to all that is a danger when you
Mhm.
leave social media unregulated. I
Right.
think what we did 2015-16 onwards as society collectively, I would say, is that we opened up this, Pandora's box, and uh, we're still just living with those consequences. Social
Right.
media is very new. Social
Right.
media companies are like, all this stuff was not even around when we were born, and we are very, very young people. So, concluding to my first point, I would say that I it makes sense to me to have
Mhm.
somebody to comply with law enforcement and address grievances of the people.
So basically, you're saying that this will kind of bring about an order within the social media aspect, because, like, as humans, obviously, we have a tendency to we kind of want things to be organized. And as
Absolutely.
of now, maybe from that's what I kind of got from your point is that things are
Yeah.
like messed up, like, as you
hmm
mentioned, cyberbullying,
hmm
right? So you need a certain amount of order in order for
hmm
it to function properly or smoothly,
hmm
right? So that was one point that you kind of right highlighted.
Yeah. See, my main view is that we regulate everything.
Hmm.
We have regulation for the films we watch. We have regulation for our banking sector. We regulate so many there are regulatory bodies for telecommunication and oil and natural gas, etc., etc. But social media is a sector which we've just only started to discover. I mean, we've all had it as a part of our lives for about a decade or so now, but when it comes to the laws, rules, legislations guiding what we do every day, it's
Hmm.
practically non-existent.
Right,
And this
right.
is where it gets messed up to me. We think that we are legally very protected. We think that we live in a system where there are a lot of checks and balances, there are a lot of authorities to protect you, and then you spend 7, 8, 9 hours a day on this, looking at so many different sites, fighting with people who are hiding behind an account, saying the worst kind of stuff, giving you the choicest of abuses.
Mm.
It it's kind of mind blowing to think of it that this is something we can't even regulate, and we spend so much of our time. It's free for all. It's like a jungle out there.
Right, right, right. For sure, for sure. That's always been the case because, like, obviously, as you mentioned, that it's relatively new for, especially for in India. Like, if you see the amount of Facebook users, YouTube users that have boomed after Geo came into existence, it was many folds.
Oh,
Like
for
the
sure.
kind of people give the example of T series becoming the most subscribed channel on YouTube. It's
Yeah.
all because of the Geo boom, and
Hmm.
that's when your point hits home is the fact that once the number of people have increased at such an exponential level, you still do not have any guidelines, which seems ridiculous. Like if you think, dude, there's so many users, but you didn't have guidelines. You
Exactly.
didn't have grievance redressal committees, or like say an officer looking after things. But then again, the point comes that, so the government's reason is that they've kind of taken this thing into consideration, that there should be a traceability. The person who originates the, let's say, a message, let's say, right? So they have listed down few things. That is that if it entails sexual content, child abuse, it affects the sovereignty and integrity of India, or the security of states, friendly relationship, etc., etc. But one point that they have talked about, and that's a really broad ambit, and that is public order. So like the people, and I kind of relate to it as well, because I am also someone who doesn't really outrightly reject the idea of IT rules, because see, first of all, from my limited understanding of things, okay, you need some sort of regulations. But then again, on the flip side, you have things that talk about public order. How does one constitute what public order really is? तो मतलब कुछ भी हो सकता है ना. You can just say anything, like if you're criticizing the government, or you're talking about something that, like, let's say, quote unquote, the government does not want you to talk about. Would that really classify like going against the public order, because it's such a broad term? So that's something that's worrying.
Yeah, I agree. Like the term, like quote unquote public order, it's always been so ambiguous, and that's essentially, I think it also creates the scope of. I think in this ambiguity lies the scope for the state to exert most of its power.
Exactly.
Because when you use such a broad term, then it's subject to the interpretation of the policymaker.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is something that sort of puts uh, these social media companies at odds with,
Hmm.
say, the government. And uh, it's it seems to me, as somebody who advocates the exercising of freedom of speech to a very large extent, it seems to me that it might not even be consistent with Indian law if you come
Hmm.
down to interpreting it that way.
Right,
But
right,
for
right.
that, you need to then, go to the courts, and then it's the whole
Get into the technicalities of
exactly,
yeah, yeah,
which you would know much better than me. I'm not a lawyer.
yeah.
But so I think, having said that, I think the term public order, I really understand. I really think it's way too ambiguous for for any policy to be implemented based on an order that creates that consists of that term. Uh,
Yeah.
Having said that, like I'm not defending the use of fairly uh, ambiguous terms to restrict or regulate people's freedom of speech. I honestly think if there's no kind of bullying going on, you should say whatever,
Yeah.
criticize whichever government you want to, state, center, foreign governments, or just not talk about politics at all on social media. It's
Right.
really up to individual capacity and choice
But
to
don't you think
actually.
it's according to the whims and fancies of the people who have made the law? Because see, the things that you mentioned, that those things happen in a perfect world. That ठीक है, bullying won't take place. Like child pornography, etc., etc. And if these being circulated, those things will come to an end. But then again, you have things that you can easily bring under the ambit of public order. Let's say I'm a person who's supporting farmers protest, ठीक है? Let's say,
Yeah.
and मेरे tweet से या मेरे किसी response से there's been a like huge thing that came into existence, a hue and cry हो गया,
Hmm.
ठीक है? And
Yeah.
those things are, let's say, they're facts, ठीक है? Then this thing can be a very draconian law as well, because then again you do not know matlab, then again it's anything and everything you say can be used against you, because the times we are living, ठीक है, it's very easy to get offended. You
Hmm.
say
I agree.
something, then it's impossible that you won't offend someone or the other. And let's say the person gets offended is in the government, ठीक है?
Hmm.
So dude, matlab, like you're gone, right? Matlab, because there's no redressal for it. Initially you had courts, ठीक है? If
Yeah.
मेरे को कुछ नहीं पसंद आया, ठीक है, like let's say Padmavat and etc., like had they gone to court and had they not beaten up Sanjay Leela Bhansali, ठीक है, had they gone to court, the court would have decided in a very judicious manner, in a very judicial manner, right? कि हाँ भाई ठीक
Hmm.
है, there are facts, this is ठीक है, हो रहा है, this is against it, this is not against it. But right now, the government, which is essentially the people who make the laws, they'll be also taking up the responsibility of a judiciary, कि भाई हम बताएंगे, हम रेगुलेट करेंगे कि ये देख सकते हो, we are telling you कि this is against public order. So that kind of fear, that कि तुम्हें पता नहीं, you don't know what might offend the people, what might offend the government, and what might be used against you. That
Hmm.
kind of a situation, like it's kind of worrying, but
It really is like kind of a catch 22, to think of it, where you don't want to make social media companies too powerful,
Mhm.
but you also don't want the state to make such ambiguous statements and then potentially hold you against it. If you make a statement now, now there's this whole degree of like evaluating. For example, you mentioned that if I was to write something on social media which offended somebody, and I don't know, it led to a aggressive response from the state, perhaps that
Mhm.
that's something that I don't know. In today's day, it seems highly possible. In many countries, it seems highly possible. To be very honest, it
Right.
in my personal view, though, I think that we've got to find the right middle ground on like where to empower the state to interfere in social media as much. And I think that brings me back to my first point that we need to legislate first, because
Yeah.
the legislations should not be targeted at restricting the power of social media companies alone. It
Mm.
can be to a certain degree reduce the uh, power the state has to interfere in social media as well. There's the the very importance of an existing regulatory body in various such scenarios is that it plays a very important role of resolving disputes.
Right. Right.
And if a certain situation arises, if we have laws, if we have rules to look at, you'd be able to find a right balance between how much power a social media company should exercise or how
Yeah.
much the government should have. I recall that yesterday Twitter put out a statement saying that I'm not going to quote it, but the gist was that it intends to cooperate and engage in dialogue.
Yeah.
However, it was very very concerned about its the safety of its employees, and along with that the uh, they made some comment about transparency and freedom of speech as well in that
Mhm.
statement,
Mhm.
which sort of led to an aggressive response from the Ministry of Information Technology,
Right.
where they indicated something like to look after freedom of speech in India.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a foreign private making entity's job. And
Mm.
so here's essentially the consumer, you and I, we have to make a
Yeah.
decision on who we allow our surveillance state to be,
Right. Right.
because
Right.
everyone's collecting data and
Mm-hmm.
everyone has interest in collecting data. And to be very honest and very controversially, I would say that it's understandable that everybody wants to collect data. The government might have some national security reasons for that. Private companies might be
Bro, perfect
associated.
example would be Cambridge Analytica as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost like it's a different issue, but my solution, if I was a policy maker, the solution I would recommend to it would be very similar. The
Okay.
presence of a legitimate uh, regulatory body
Body.
and
Yeah. Nodal
certain
officer,
legislations.
etc. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel
But then
like,
again, Raj, your point is that okay, everyone is looking for it, and I agree that data is the more. It's more. It's the most valuable thing in the world right now, right?
yeah,
But then again, wanting something and getting it away are two different things. Like, okay, if I want something, doesn't mean it's ethically correct that the same example like you gave for data. Like, okay, every institution wants to grab hold of your personal data for their personal benefits, right? But then again, that doesn't mean it's the right thing to do, because obviously, as per like let's say India's perspective, you have a right to privacy, which which in fact will get violated if, because see, WhatsApp and all these Signal and all these social media apps, they have this end-to-end encryption. But
mm,
if you introduce laws such as these, it has the tendency to violate that end-to-end encryption, because obviously how
yeah,
else on earth would you get to know who was the first
yeah,
originator?
yeah,
So like you have to weigh, because ek taraf you are saying "ठीक है, you're bringing about positive changes, but then again on the other side, at what cost, right?
yeah. I mean, yeah,
It goes both ways.
this situation presently is highly violative of the privacy policy of WhatsApp, which I
Yeah.
think the government has been trying to tweak them to change for a while now. And but I do remember that if any new WhatsApp conversation that you start for the past 4 5 years now, the first thing you see is that end-to-end encryption
Encryption.
notification. So I
Yeah.
mean, it's a very long-standing policy measure that WhatsApp has applied.
Hmm.
Uh, and To me personally, it gives me a level of comfort as well that I feel like my data is protected.
Hmm.
Now, ha- having said that, getting back into the complex society that India really is, in India, the spread of fake news and the spread of malicious propaganda, it's it's it spreads like a wildfire. It is
And that's the
really
reason
quick.
why the number of forwards that you can send on WhatsApp is limited to 5. And
Yeah,
that's only into existence in the Indian subcontinent. I don't think there's
yeah.
that kind of restriction is there anywhere else.
Anywhere else, yeah. And I think and this particular policy measure from WhatsApp was introduced after a couple of lynchings, actually. There were
Yeah.
2 3 incidents where
In
people were
UP
literally
itself, yeah.
lynched. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. I think one was even from West
Muzaffarnagar.
Bengal, actually,
Okay.
I think.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
I'm not sure, West Bengal, Tripura, or somewhere in Bengal or Northeast. I can't recall right now.
Yeah.
But so it brings me to the point that here there is such a quick spread of information that can lead to deaths.
Yeah.
Now, if you're a law enforcer, the least cooperation you could expect from the platform that, for no fault of the platform, was used by these malicious elements to kill somebody is that
Yeah.
I at least find out who sent this message. I can
Mhm.
at least, but I agree that WhatsApp raises a valid point that it is violative of our fundamental right,
Yeah.
right to privacy.
Yeah.
And I find myself here in a situation where I understand WhatsApp's perspective. They are committed to providing safe data, and
Necessary evil, kind of
yeah,
your stance on it. That it's a
yeah,
necessary evil, right?
yeah. I think questions may be raised about the government's intent to control social media
Right.
companies. That
Yeah.
that that will be a judgment which will be clouded by uh, too much political
Right.
interference.
But also, Raj, I like recently I was just going through Ravi Shankar's interview. He gave it on Aaj Tak Pata Nahi. I probably think it today Aji ka tha, but I don't know. It might have been yesterday or pre-recorded. I don't know. He said that why only are these social media companies targeting India in the sense that why are they raising this question of privacy now? Because you have the FBI who has been doing it for
Yeah, and
ages.
only in India. Yeah,
Yeah, you've been doing it for ages. You have, and they call you, na, in their Congress, they call Sundar
yeah.
Pichai, they call all these people and they ask
Jack
questions.
Dorsey and all these guys. Yeah.
Exactly. One. And even in United Kingdom, wherein you have such robust privacy laws, the whole European Union. But yet again, these companies are willing to go there and answer some questions, like,
Yeah.
right? So he raised, I kind of think that he raised this valid question, a point of why is it only in India that you're talking about these things and you kind of give in to the other international agencies or you give in to the FBI, you give in to United Kingdom, EU, and when it comes to India, you're saying no, we cannot do this because it goes against
Yeah.
our privacy policy. So then again, he has a valid point out there.
I
So
mean, you start lecturing the government of India on Indian law,
yeah,
like,
exactly.
which I doubt. If you did that in the US, I would really respect social media companies, but they won't.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, for sure.
the blatantly, I think this was also mentioned by several news channels which have been covering this issue very deeply. Like if I am to name one, I've been following Vion and Palki Sharma Upadhyay raised this point about FBI literally requiring Apple to unlock iPhones for them every now and then.
Yeah,
Uh, but I think several people raised a counter to that, saying that even then Apple sort of declines, and they really push it away, push away the law enforcers even there.
but do they
But
really?
that's one important question. Like, we don't really know the depths of it. And secondly, it's not about non-cooperation with law enforcement officials. I think even in India, even people who are speaking in favor of state in many issues don't cooperate with law enforcers.
For sure,
Like,
for sure.
imagine being on a traffic light. Even we get a little annoyed, like, bro. But very unrelated. My point was that the part that the honorable information technology minister was trying to say was that in the United States and in the United Kingdom, these social media companies express a respect for authority and express a respect for the elected legislature in place. So you'll
Yeah,
have Mark Zuckerberg suited and booting coming in front of Congress, Sundar Pichai doing the same, Jack
yeah,
Dorsey. I've seen all of their congressional,
hearings.
hearings.
Yeah,
But I think this essentially remains exclusive to the uh, mostly the United States, I would say, primarily because all these companies were headquartered there. They found their
there, right,
origins there. Most of
right.
their executives, senior ones, are at least American
Hmm.
or get the US citizenship eventually.
Yeah,
And it's really not about them leaving away powerful or developed nations even, because that brings me to February 2021, where Facebook literally threatened to shut down a lot of news services in Australia. Like, they decided that they'll stop showing various news reports on Facebook in parts of Australia, because at that time Australian lawmakers were really advocating Facebook to pay for a lot of the news content that's published on Facebook. So, for example, if I run my newspaper publication agency in Australia, and my Facebook page posts something, and so it's only getting published on Facebook. There's a summarized gist of whatever my website is trying to publish. So that's my intellectual property. That's my hard work. That's my journalists, me and my team of journalists who did that. And
Mm.
people are only essentially reading it on Facebook. So
Right,
my website might not even get a click.
right.
So these uh, these journalists and these newspapers, they need money to operate. It's not a financially prudent decision to let Facebook
Definitely.
publish all your content and then not even pay you.
Right.
It was a
Mm.
very reasonable expectation of the Australian lawmakers who proposed this to do that. And one of the vocal critics of Facebook, his account got suspended, and you know, sort of an
That's the
intimidation
problem,
tactic by
That's the
these
problem
social media
because,
companies themselves. Yeah,
yeah,
actually, I'd like to finish by as soon as he became a little critical of Facebook, his comments about COVID-19 started getting a lot of
circulated.
space on social media, and they would
Yeah.
say, this is a naive man. This is what he thinks of COVID. So why should you listen to him about Facebook wanting to pay like
So essentially, they're trying to back their points by bringing out that
exactly,
this person is stupid, like he's not speaking sense. So that's the
exactly.
problem, because now you come to question as to how powerful these social media sites can become, like
Yeah.
potentially can become. Also, because we remember during the Donald Trump when he won the election, it was all about how Cambridge Analytica was being used,
Yeah.
and it had everything to do with social media because social media was kind of snooping into it, like they were
Yeah.
trying to get into the like what. So you had these persuaders. I think they use the term persuaders for people who are young voters, such as
Hmm.
you and I, right? So
Yeah.
what they essentially did was they kind of, let's say, what they did was they showed you something. If I'm, let's say, you and I are white Americans, okay,
Hmm.
and they kind of showed you that, see, these people, these Asian people, they're coming to our country and they're taking
Hmm.
away our jobs. Obviously, they didn't show that thing outrightly, but they kind of intended to. They were referring to it, and that is the kind of the reason why we as persuaders, uh, we kind of got into it, and they were trying to project that because of this you're losing out on your jobs. So essentially, you, the native people of America, are losing out because other people are coming into your country, and
Right.
that kind of played into your mind. And okay,
Yeah.
once you can ignore it, but if it comes out again and again, they came in form of ads or whatever they
Hmm.
did. So that kind of subconsciously you registered those things,
Yeah.
and that is kind
Yeah.
of, yeah. And they were saying that Trump's campaign, some like they bore costs worth millions and millions of dollars per day. That brings to me to the point that essentially how powerful can these companies get?
Yeah.
Yeah, like, okay, one is your social media, the other is your OTT platforms as well. You talk about OTT platforms, okay, so how they're kind of, influencing, not influencing. I mean, it's to each their own. Obviously,
Hmm.
one perspective of it would be, okay, you're trying to curb you know, the media. The other would
Hmm.
be, there needs to be some sort of reasonable restrictions as to what you can show,
Yeah.
which does not, affect the minds of
Yeah.
people, it affect the
Yeah.
sovereignty of the country, etc., etc. But then again, I'm because see, I am, to be very honest, conflicted. कि ठीक है, on one side I do feel कि ठीक है, if things like inciting violence, a riot, child abuse, child pornography, अगर ये सब चीज they are circulating, then obviously you need to pinpoint who the first originator was. But then
Absolutely.
again, how well do you use it? How well does the government, or how well anybody who's in power uses it? Because with power, there's that addiction with power. You want things to work, and you want things to function according to you, as per your whims and fancies.
Hmm.
So that brings me,
Yeah.
like, to this weird. And also, one last thing that is really, I found it really mind-boggling, was the emergency blocking power that the government in its gazette,
Yeah.
they kind of talked
Yeah.
about that. If they find a content that they feel it violates whatever, like the sovereignty, etc., and even goes against the public order, then again a very broad ambit, they have the Ministry of IB has this, a power to block this thingy on, like, instantly. They don't even need time, that they don't even need to give notification to the person, etc. So that's kind of a messed up situation, but
Dangerous, perhaps.
very dangerous, very dangerous.
Yeah.
And then again, it's kind of a like if you talk about the goods that it kind of entails, then obviously then you're like, yeah, theek hai. Makes sense what they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you mentioned reasonable restriction, and that's I think something that Ministry of Information and Technology also had written in their response to. I think one of the statements with respect to WhatsApp, I think that even the right to privacy may have some reasonable restrictions when it comes to this case. But I think again, unchecked power to the state, unchecked power to social media companies. I consider them both as dangerous.
For sure.
Social media companies, again, like I watched this news report where they were comparing social media companies to the modern East India Company, and it sounds funny in the first go, like when I give you that line, but to think of how a lot of these social media companies do blatant, unapologetic competition killing. Like if
Mm.
you're I mean, there's a very popular app which we all use. It started as a photo sharing app, and then it started making filters. It started
Yeah.
making 15-20 second videos, and it's every time it acquires a feature brought in from another app, it's killing competition.
Mm.
And it's uh, we know which big social media giant it's associated with. So
Yeah.
there's got to be a point. If this was any other type of enterprise which wasn't social media,
Mm.
the government or the state or a regulatory body, something like a competition commission like we have in
Right.
India, they would literally be trying to stop you from forming a monopoly here.
Mm.
But I feel here even the policymakers' hands are tied. What
Yeah.
can you do when there are no laws, acts, anything guiding all of this?
For sure.
So I think I come back to where I started my point, that in today's day, I feel like we're coming face to face with the reality that it was inevitable really to at some point recognize that
Mm.
social media space should thrive and it should be very free, but it
Yeah.
should be subject to some regulations, some legislations to prevent first of all them forming a monopoly, because they can control dangerous amount of information, dangerous amounts of data, and then also start regulating the misuse of social media by the general public like you and me also. So I am kind of with I want to say my last thing here, that I'm, despite the dangerous tendencies a policymaker may show when using ambiguous terms to restrict social media, at some level, I also feel policymakers right now, whether Australia, India, the United States, they have a very challenging task on
Mhm.
forming the rules, the laws, the guidelines which will guide social media for I don't know how long.
Yeah.
So I think that's my conclusion.
Yeah. So Raj, like obviously we discussed at length about how we as young individuals think about it. Obviously, we're not experts. We're just giving our
Yeah.
opinion based on whatever we perceive.
Just some guy
Obviously,
who can read the newspaper.
exactly. And like, obviously, so
Yeah.
we find ourselves in a very privileged position that
Yeah.
obviously we can grasp what like 97% of India probably or 95% population of India would not even, care to understand what IT rules is, whether it's
Yeah.
draconian, whether it's something really good. But we are in a good position. I would say we're in a very privileged position to, at least have a discussion over it and kind of understand. Because if we are able to understand, we being so privileged, then obviously like you can't really expect others to understand the same things as well because of the demographics of the country.
Yeah.
Another thing that we kind of talked like kind of agreed on was the fact that unchecked power in in any hand, like be it government, be it social media, be it individuals, is harmful. And
Precisely.
I don't really recall who said it, but there was this amazing quote. I read it. I don't know, Navneet and all these had these books जिसके पीछे में बहुत अच्छे अच्छे quotes आते थे. So I had read that.
Classmate and Navneet.
Classmate and Navneet, yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah, I
उसने
love
कहा
that.
कि the fear of the past was that humans might turn into slaves, but the fear of the future is that we might turn into robots. And that
Yeah,
kind of like
well
you
said.
don't
Yeah.
on the face of it you would think कि हाँ ठीक है बोल दिया, but like
Hmm.
understand when you bring into the social media aspect of it, when you talk about all of this, and like keyboard warriors.
Yeah.
all these things. That kind of makes you realize ki, maybe there is a need to bring in such laws.
Yeah.
Maybe it can be regulated in a much better, in a more inclusive manner, so as to not, intrude into the other person's privacy
Mhm.
and all. But then again, that we can just wait and watch. Like that
Exactly.
remains to be seen. There's nothing we can add. There's nothing you and I as individuals can do. It's all upon how the government regulates it and how
Yeah.
it's being,
Yeah.
projected.
I think lastly, I think what everyone can do is advocate uh, naturally a free social media space and freedom of expression, and B, also advocate a responsibility on the part of social media giants to not uh, cr- stay as unrestricted as they are and
Yeah,
get away with unchecked power.
for
Those are
sure.
my thoughts from the
And
start.
uniformity. Like if you are addressing your stuff at the US congressional hearings, then you have to do it everywhere.
Then you might as well respect guidelines issued by the Ministry of Information Technology in India or
Or be
in
it anywhere. Yeah.
Zambia or
Yeah.
South Africa or anywhere. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that would bring us to the end of it.
Right.
So
This was fun.
thank you for coming. It was short
Thank
notice,
you
I
for
know that.
having me. No, no, no.
But
I was happy to be here, and I will always be available if you ever
yeah, for sure, we'll have
want to
you
hear
on.
my opinions again.
For sure, we'll have you on the other episodes as well. So
Perfect, man.
thank
Take
you,
care.
thank you. Okay.